Hello, my name is Silvester Henderson, and I am the CEO for Professor for Life Incorporated. I am so excited this afternoon to interview Dr. Jeremiah J. Sims. He is the owner of a school entitled, him and his wife are owners of a school entitled the Acton Academy, located in Redding, California. Welcome, Dr. Sims.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, you know what? We are so grateful to have you this afternoon. You know what? Can you tell us something about our digital media world, something about yourself? Tell us about, your academic journey, where you went to school, college, grew up, and all those wonderful things that make you the person
I'm sorry. So it's a long, circuitous story, so I won't bore you all with details, but I was born in Oakland, California. I lived on 98th and Holly. Initially, then we moved to Richmond, from the frying pan to the fire in some respects, moved to the Iron Triangle where I lived on 7th in Pennsylvania for a time right around the corner from, that's right in Triangle Court, right? So in the heart of the Iron Triangle. And what I would later, when I had the terminology, understand to be a fence line community. So a fence line community is a community that abuts a gross polluter. And fence line communities are in areas called EPA sacrifice zones. And so that means that the EPA strictures with regard to pollution are lifted so that businesses will stay there as opposed to taking jobs overseas. And so our neighbor where I live was Chevron, the Chevron refinery. So we all had asthma and other upper respiratory issues as a result of being only separated from Chevron by a chain link fence. There's places all over the United States. We know what happened in Flint, Michigan. There's a place and Heather McGee talks about this in her incredible book, The Sum of Us. There's an area in Louisiana that's called Cancer Alley. The people there are 70% more likely to be diagnosed with cancer. And Professor, I'm gonna ask you rhetorically, what you think the percentage of Black folks in Cancer Alley is?
Probably, I would say 70, 80%.
No, it's just not 100. So it's about 98%.
Wow.
Right? This is referred to as Cancer Alley. This is an area that again is a fence line community, which is situated within a sacrifice zone. And so, that's what happens with our students. And I'll get back to my story in just a second. But my story is kind of indicative of this. We end up missing a lot of time, especially low-income Black and brown students, because we're sick. Not because school isn't important, not because we don't want to be there, but because we're sick, right? And then we don't have access to adequate healthcare. So this is kind of cyclical violence that happens, right? And so that was my story for a long time. When I was at school, I did well. We had California standardized tests back then, and we used to get trophies for those, right? And even though I had no idea what the test was going to test beforehand, there was no test prep in my neighborhood. I still did remarkably well on those tests. I was in the top 3%. In math, up until I went to middle school. I had a counselor who told me, Jeremiah, nobody cares. I got in trouble. And he said, nobody cares what you do in middle school. We socially pass. And so I took that to mean, because my mom was, single mom. She worked overnight. I was a latchkey kid. So she wasn't available to be as active in my education as she wanted to be, because she had to work to keep food on the table. And so I took that to mean I didn't have to do anything, because he told me, Jeremiah, we're going to socially pass you. So nobody's going to look at your middle school transcripts. This is from my guidance counselor, who would then later become principal. And so the foundation that I had built in math up until that point, dissipated, because math is scaffolded. And in addition to, the kind of foundation that I had in math, where the year prior I was in the top 1 or 2% in the state of California, which isn't saying a whole lot, but that's the reality of it. When I got to high school, I was behind because I didn't have to do anything. And so I went to high school at Middle College High School at Contra Costa College. I graduated from there. I was a really, really, really mediocre student. And it had a lot to do, I think, with the expectations that were placed on me. And I'm not trying to pass the buck, because there's a responsibility that I had. But my only understanding of education was that it wasn't meant for me, right? Because my mom was on the fringes of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. So we had a really kind of clear political positionality, but I didn't quite get it in its entirety when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, right? So I knew that I was angry about something. I didn't know exactly what I was angry about. And so I wanted to be a revolutionary, but that revolt was not for my own betterment or for the betterment of my society. It turned into something that mirrored rebellion. And so it wasn't until the 12th grade that I had a teacher who seemed wholly invested in my academic success. And so I used to always get in trouble in class, and I'm not funny anymore, but I used to be pretty funny. I'll be honest. Like in yearbooks, I had best personality, all that type of stuff. I got dad humor now. Not everybody my kids think I'm hilarious, but that's about it. And so because I was always wisecracking in class, she did something that's commensurate with this idea of critical pedagogy, even before the term was coined. She said, Jeremiah, if on Fridays, I'm going to give you 7 minutes. If you can make the class laugh during your stand-up routine, then we won't have homework over the weekend, right? And so what she was doing, this was an older white woman who had already made a bunch of money, owned a bunch of houses in the Bay Area, was teaching because she loved teaching. She wasn't teaching for a paycheck, but her commitment to the students that she served, these overwhelmingly Black and brown low-income students that she served, was undeniable. And so we built a relationship based on that. And then she told me, she said, Jeremiah, if you go and you take the SAT, I will give you extra credit. And so I took the SAT and I did, average on math, because again, the foundation that I had been compromised by me and by some external forces. But this is the thing that kept me, because I always knew education was important. My mom went as far as high school. She was always espousing how incredibly important education was. I took the SAT, Professor Henderson, and I missed 2 on the English section. Back then it was only out of 800. I got a 790 out of 800 on the SAT. I didn't even know what the acronym SAT stood for. And I was the first one finished. Usually when the first one finished, you have many classes that you taught. That doesn't mean you did well. I just got up and left. It was like 7 a.m. I had to go to Berkeley High, right, which was not in Richmond. So I had to figure out how to get over there. I took that test. And when I got the results back, I forgot I'd even taken the test. When I got the results back, it said I did better than 99% of the people that took the test in the country. And so I always kept that kind of in my proverbial back pocket. I was like, all right, if I can't, because I wanted to be a boxer. If I can't figure out how to box, then at least I can go be an English teacher. And I thought that's all it took, right? Because I didn't understand how education worked, because I'm the first one in my family to go to college. But I always held on to that. My experiences with Miss Horrigan, rest in peace. And I didn't get to thank her before she passed. So I'm always about thanking people now. I had opportunities after I was done, but I waited too long, and I wasn't able to thank her. But that experience, someone believing in me until she told me I was college material. She asked me, she said, Jeremiah, are you thinking about going to college? I said, well, my life expectancy is only 21. If I make it past 21, I'll start to conceive of a plan after that. And she cried, right? I was joking. At least I thought it was. I was joking, but she cried about that. And I knew that her care and her consideration for me was real, right? And that's why I was amenable to taking the test in the first place. So I stopped going to school. I went to community college. Like I said, I'll speed up the story. I went to middle college, and middle college is situated on Contra Costa College's campus. So, and I live right around the corner at that point. The best idea was not to go to college at the same place I went to high school. I'd go home for lunch. I wasn't coming back. There wasn't no way I was coming back. I was home for the day. And so it didn't matter how many classes I had, but I was not conversant in kind of education enough to know that you can actually drop classes, right? You can drop classes. You don't want a whole bunch of W's, but a W is far better than an F. But I would never drop classes. I would just stick around long enough. And because of this hubris that I had, this unfounded hubris that I had, maybe based on that SAT score, think I could just go in and ace the test, ace the final and do okay. And I didn't. I got a bunch of D's and F's. And as a result, I stopped going to school. I started selling used cars. I had a good time doing that. I was making some good money at that time. But I just had this calling. I kept hearing about young men from my neighborhood and adjacent neighborhoods who weren't doing well. They were either incarcerated, which is a kind of walking dead, right? They were justice impacted, or their lives were being snuffed out prematurely due to fratricidal violence. And so I felt like I had obviously it was not all on me, but there was something that I could do, right? Making a few $1,000s a month for myself selling cars was not going to fulfill me the way that being a teacher was. And so I figured that I wanted to be a teacher. But I didn't want to go do those. And I had tried community college several times. I was in and out of community college. I remember my first foray into community college, I had a professor call me a creep and tell me to get out of her class. And so, because I missed the part of the matriculation process where you take a placement test. And so they just took a look at me. I had my gold everything and my Jordans and my pants down by my knees. And they just put me in the remedial class. They put me in the very first class with regard to English. And I was bored out of my mind. And so because I was bored, I didn't know how to act. And so, I asked a lot of questions, what I thought were perspicacious questions, but the professor was not amused by the questions that I was asking. And so eventually I was kicked out. So I ended up amassing in my first kind of 4 years of community college, a 1.1 GPA. And the only thing that kept me over 1.1 was badminton and weightlifting. I had those two classes and I was able to do okay in those. So I was done with school. I figured that I couldn't do it. It wasn't for me. Then my younger brother told me about something called academic renewal. I think it's called academic remediation, academic renewal, where you have to take 15 consecutive units with the C average or better and the D's and F's on your, and I'm saying all this specifically in case anybody listening is thinking about going to school, right? So you had to be out of school for a year, and then all the D's and F's on your transcript no longer count against your transferable GPA once you completed academic renewal. Every system has a different program. But I'd taken a bunch of classes at DVC and Contra Costa. They're all in the same system. So I was able to do academic renewal through there. I pulled my grades up. And then there's a kind of confounding variable too. I wanted to serve my community. There was also a young lady that I was interested in. Her father is and you don't have to be from Hong Kong to be ardent with regard to education, but it turns out that those two things congealed for him. He was all about education. He said, if you want to marry my daughter, you're going to have to get a college degree. And even more than that, you're going to have to go to UC Berkeley, right? So he had 4 brothers. He and his 4 brothers all went to Berkeley, and his kids all went to Berkeley. And most of their kids went to either Berkeley or UCLA. And so that was something that was very important for him. And so you're talking to a student who had a 1.1 GPA. I didn't figure out how I'm gonna get to UC Berkeley with 1.1 GPA, right? And so I went back to school. I wanted to better my community. I also wanted to win this young woman's heart. And spoiler, we've been married for 18 years now. We have 6 kids. And so I was able to do better. I'm at a 4.0 GPA. And, once I went back to school, but, I still had these pesky C's on my transcript. You're going to get rid of D's and F's. And so ultimately I applied to UC Berkeley. I got help from the TAP program, the Transfer Alliance Project, and they were great. But they told me, they said, look, Jeremiah, you're going to have to appeal. You're not going to get in on the first try. And so just be ready for the appeal process, but we think we have a good chance. But my application doesn't just go to man, it goes to God. And so I got in on the first try. And here's the thing. I went from a 1.1 GPA at community college, and I had people telling me that I was incapable. So this is the thing, I got to back up for a second. So when I was at community college, I was trying to find a counselor that would help me get to UC Berkeley. I couldn't even find a counselor who would humor me until Dara Green, who was at Vista College, which is now Berkeley City College. She's at Chabot now. She was willing to at least entertain the idea of me going to UC Berkeley. She said, you have to have a 3.75 GPA. That's what needs to happen. And so we had the conversation. And some of the other counselors that I went to, I said, hey, I got into UC Berkeley. And one of them looked at me with the most sincere look on her face. And she said, are you sure you want to go there and compete with some of the brightest minds in the country? And so I said, no, I don't actually. That was too much. I opted instead. I only applied to 2 places, State College and UC Berkeley. And I had guaranteed admission in State College. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go there. But my wife, who was not my wife at that time, but is UC Berkeley alum, she was like, no, man, you go to Berkeley. Turns out Berkeley gave me full scholarship. So it made it an easy conversation. And so I went there, and I say all that to say, once I got to Berkeley, my GPA, I got straight A's for 10 consecutive semesters. So it wasn't that I was not capable of doing the work, right? And sometimes we interface with students and we feel like they're not capable. They just have to find their passion. We have to create safe spaces for them to be fully human and have a full range of human experiences so that they know that their voice matters, that their epistemological curiosities matter, all these things matter so that we can serve them. And so anyway, so that's what happened to me. I found people who were interested in seeing me reach my fullest potential. And so I did an undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley in rhetoric. I don't know if y'all know this, but rhetoric at Berkeley has the same attrition rate as physics. It's tough major, but I enjoyed it because y'all got to remember I said I was a used car salesman. So to transfer from a used car salesman to a rhetoric degree, perfect, right? That's almost like a straight line. And so I realized that I hadn't had enough schooling, so I applied to an MA Ph.D. program to work with Professor Jabari Mahiri at UC Berkeley. And I got in, and I did pretty well there. My dissertation was on it was called Man Up, and it was on a program for Black males, a STEM-focused program for Black males, and what happens when you use a kind of Afrocentric curriculum and a critical pedagogical approach to STEM education for Black males. And again, another spoiler alert: they do a lot better in math when you do that, right? When you humanize it for them. And so that brings me up to now. I've written some books. I wrote Revolutionary STEM Education, which 2018 book that was based on my dissertation. I wrote Minding the Obligation Gap in Community Colleges. And then my most recent book, 2023 book with my friend Jeremy Wallace, is The White Educator's Guide to Equity, where we look at how to position educators, irrespective of their ethno-racial identity or socioeconomic status or political orientation, any of those things, how to position them to commit to radical love as praxis. And so I know that was a really long explanation. And so
not at all. Dr. Jeremiah, I think that was wonderful.
Thank you.
You know what? You answered the question back a couple of years ago. The community college changed the requirements for students with their entry-level English and math classes.
Right.
Because what you experienced was what was typically happening in community colleges all over California, where people would see someone African American and just make basically a racial judgment about them. Oh, you know what? Just stick them in entry-level English.
Right.
Just stick them in entry-level math. And so these people would be stuck in these courses, these GE courses, for 3, 4, 5 years, and they lose the motivation to go to college.
Right.
And so I'm, as a community college professor, but also having worked at the 4-year college for 20 years at a state university, sometimes there is a great difference in how the different systems approach students. You know, one system is going to develop more intellectual capacity. That's Berkeley. You know, they're going to give you more challenges sometimes. And I think that the community college holistically could begin to learn from that. To encourage more, to raise the standards, because when you raise the standards and develop relationships, many times your students will rise to the occasion. Right. And the thing I liked about it was that you just basically needed someone to say, Jeremiah, you know, you really are smart, and I believe that you can go to college, man. You know, you could do it and have a conversation instead of just assuming that you couldn't. So I really appreciate your journey. Now tell me, describe your work with all of that, I would say, urban insight.
So it's interesting.
But let me ask this first. Describe your work in terms of supporting DEI activism as a research scholar.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? I'm not a proponent of like DEI. I feel like DEI is somewhat anachronistic now, so I'm gonna qualify that, right?
Okay.
So I'm much more interested in so if I take, right, you know this, if we get together, right, with your connections, right, we get together and we recruit a bunch of brilliant students who are racialized as white, right? And we can unpack this some other point. There's no white people, but there are people who are racialized as white, right? Because of systemic racism, you need a kind of thesis so that you can then identify the antithesis, the antithesis, which is black. So anyhow, if we take a bunch of brilliant white males and we put them at Morehouse, well, guess what? We can check a box with regard to diversity, right? We've diversified. You see what I'm saying? We take them to HBCU, we diversified. And that's an anachronistic view of diversity, right? And equity for me has become a kind of catch-all. You know what happens, right? All words get co-opted, right? If Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's work can be co-opted, then guess what? Equity can be co-opted too, right?
Absolutely.
And so what has happened is that everything is an equity issue now. right? If you don't give me what I want, irrespective of what my ethno-racial identity is, I can say that that's an equity issue. And so equity for me should be the very first step towards justice. There's a graduated difference between, not just nuance, but graduated difference between equity and justice. Yes, for equity, for sure for equity. But we need to be striving for justice, because equity for me, right, and this is oversimplification, right? But equity for me, you can almost just apply the golden rule, right? If I treat people the way that I want to be treated, right, provided that I am someone who is not, facing some type of issues where I want to be mistreated, right? If I want to be treated fairly and I treat people that way, right? The golden rule, the platinum rule, whatever it's called, it's almost as though I'm fulfilling most of the criterion to be an equitable person. I'm treating you as a human being, right? I'm recognizing your humanity. I'm recognizing your radical dignity. The difference between equity and justice is that irrespective of whether or not there's any reciprocal benefit for me, right? Or if the problem that you're facing also makes my life harder, I'm still willing to work to fight it, right? So if I am someone who is wholly invested in liberation for my LGBTQIA plus family, right? Because I'm a cisgender straight male, those things don't affect me in the same way. But in order to be someone who is invested in justice, I need to fight for them, irrespective of whether or not I see a benefit from it. And so to me, that's where equity starts and stops. People will do equity work insofar as their cause is also benefited from that work, right? Yeah, I'll help brown students as long as black students are being positively impacted too, right? And I'm not knocking that. Anything that lifts people up, I'm for it. But irrespective of whether or not the group that I'm most interested in is benefited, I still need to fight against oppression, right? That's what justice looks like. And so I'm much more interested in justice. And so the work that I do is not so much DEI, but it's race, equity, inclusion, and justice, right? But a very, very specific definition of equity. And so, in doing this work, this is what I found to be the case. And it sounds too sentimental in some places, right? But I feel like radical love is it. But you got to love justice. I would love it for every educator to love every student that they interface with, but that seems maybe too tall a task. But if you love justice, right? If you love that you can contribute to a society where people can be exactly who they are and not be sanctioned or castigated for it or punished for it, so much so that you're willing to fight for it and whatever your sphere of influence is, right? Then you're affecting justice. And so that's what I'm interested in. And I think that love impels that. A love for justice is necessary, because once you have justice, then you can ensure that there are safe spaces that produce radical inclusivity. Radical inclusivity means you can be exactly who you are. You don't have to check any aspect of your culture or identity or sexuality at the door of the classroom in order to be viewed as someone full of promise and potential. And so that's what I'm after.
You know what? That's beautiful. And that's really makes a lot of sense. Tell us, how does your school that you and your wife created, the Acton Academy, how will it support your principle that you just...
go ahead.
Radical inclusion and justice. How does it support that? How does the Acton Academy support that?
So it's interesting, right? So I'm a Bay Area guy. Like I said, so we've been in Reading for 3 years. Reading is decidedly more conservative than the Bay Area is. But, I'm also someone who studied Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And things aren't always the way they seem either, right? I almost would rather be in a place where the lines are clearly drawn than in a place where, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King talked about this, right? The biggest enemy to progress was white moderates, right? Or white liberals is what he was speaking to, folks who were, in one sense, saying that I'm here to support the work, but anytime they became uncomfortable, they would turn away from the work, right? Yep. Or not just turn away, but also repudiate the work. And so here, the battle lines are more clearly drawn. You see the no CRT bumper stickers and those types of things, right? And so it's easier to kind of find your footing in that. But with regard to the school, I'm not trying to tell these kids what to think. I would never I don't even inculcate my own children, right? I'm sure they know what I believe, but I don't force them. But I am focused on metacognition. I want young people to think about the way that they think. And so that's the work of this school. For all the young people, right now we have 50 students, right? For all the young people that we are blessed to serve, I am hoping that irrespective of what they leave this place believing, that they're able to think through it. And a lot of the work that we do here is Socratic, right? And so, and it was, this is a not a franchise model, but affiliate model. So there's 350 Actons worldwide. And so, my undergraduate degree in rhetoric was serendipitous, but we're not focusing on the kind of the Socratic method because of that. It preceded my role at Acton. And so that's already built into the curriculum. And so, we have students who believe much what their parents do, right? And some of those things are, in contradistinction to what I believe, and it's perfectly okay. I still love them the same way, but I need them to be able to argue both sides, right? I need them to be able to argue both sides of, what's happening in Gaza, right? Not just this kind of biblical explanation of these are God's chosen people so they can basically do whatever they want, right? Because the Bible, this is a conversation we had with students the other day, right? Well, the Bible says that, right? But what if people don't have the same Bible, right? Or they don't believe in the Bible at all? How then can you have the conversation, right? And so those are the types of things that we are invested in doing here, not inculcating, but creating opportunities for students to wrestle with the way that they understand the world. And so one of the things that we have to do, right, is to be really careful to disambiguate this kind of conflation that happens, not just for students, actually happens for adults also. So what will happen is that people oftentimes confuse their values and their opinions, right? And so they're two very different things, right? Values there's something that you should cling to, provided they're egalitarian values, they're around fairness, but your opinion should be malleable, right? Values can be static, but opinions should be malleable. Based on new information, your opinion can change. And I tell the students, right, really simple explanation. At one point, many of you all believed that Santa Claus was real. Now you don't. What happened, right? You got new information, right? Your opinion. That was never a value. That was only ever an opinion. But like the way that politics, are so polarized, right? People conflate values and opinions. I mean, the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, they were doing that all based on their opinion, but they thought it was about values. Right? Their opinion was that something egregious happened and they needed to react in a certain way, right? But in reality, they thought that was values. I'm fighting for freedom. I'm fighting against tyranny. That was just opinion, right? And so that's one of the main conversations. And so the guiding question this year for the young people that I'm serving in the middle and high school is truth discovered or is it created? Right? And there's so much to unpack with that question, right? So everything that we look at, we're trying to figure out whether or not truth is created, right? Or discovered, right? And I give them space to do this and encourage them to do this. They can question, they can have this kind of epistemological questioning regarding the question itself, because I'm presenting those things as a binary, right? Either one or the other, but is it a false binary? And so so all the work that we're doing it kind of adheres around those things. And there's this kind of latent benefit too, because, I'm 48 years old now. There was no social media when I was growing up. And these young folks now, they're facing there was like 5 or 6 people in my immediate locale who could, inform the way that I thought about myself, whether I was adequate or inadequate or whatever else, right? But when you have access to social media, you got people all across the world who don't even really know you, who can tell you that you're not good enough, or you're not this, or you're not that. And so that's another reason why we use that as the guiding question, right? I'm not so didactic about that, but I'm hoping that they will receive some of those things so that they can vet the information that they receive, so that their identity and their opinion of themselves is not based on people who don't even know them. So that's part of what we want to do too.
One of the things, Dr. Sims, that is so apparent to me is that Berkeley did a good job in giving you and helping to develop intellectual capacity. I could tell. I can tell generally quickly when I'm speaking to someone, having been around an OG. I can tell when an academic has entry-level abilities for thinking critically as opposed to advanced levels. And I really enjoy it. It is such a joy to hear you speak because your mind is so expansive. And it looks at things more kind of like not just looking at the carpet, but evaluating the soil that the carpet sits on.
Oh, for sure.
Or the foundation. And so I appreciate that. And that's really one of the issues that we struggle in the community college. You have this base of this education system that is a good system and to some degree, but a lot of times unfortunately, many of the professionals don't have the academic capacity to know how to really evaluate and get down to the core root of a problem, because many of the issues in the community college, and not just the community colleges, other four-year colleges as well.
Oh, for sure.
They've been around. I'm 63. You're 48. Yeah. I'm 63. And we've been talking about equitable concerns and matters when I was a kid. And I'm going on 64 this year. Yeah. And nothing has changed, Charlie. Listen, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say this real quick. So in Minding the Obligation Gap, I talked about community colleges and how they have the capacity to function as disruptive technologies, right? So we hear these words. You know, when I was in school, I was always accused of being disruptive, and that was a pejorative term at the time. But if you think about Silicon Valley, there's billions of dollars being spent every year on what? The next disruptive technology, right? So actually disruption is good. Disruption is lucrative, right? And so, I mean, you can look at Tesla, right? I mean, I got issues with Elon Musk. That aside, Tesla disrupted the market. And so this idea of a disruptive technology is that it changes the market to the point where if other entities in similar space don't come on board, then they risk becoming obsolete. Community colleges have the capacity to function as disruptive technologies. They can disrupt the inequities that we see in the educational system, but we have instead functioned almost exclusively as junior colleges, not community colleges, where we are trying to just be feeders for, we want to give out some certificates too, but primarily we want to be feeders for other colleges. So we feel like we have to replicate what four-year colleges do, but we don't, because four-year colleges are much more insular and they're much more selective. Community college means that anybody can come. It's the community's college. And so if we actually radically reimagined the purpose and even nature of community colleges, we can create spaces where students are fully prepared to go to 4-year, fully prepared to get a degree, whatever, a certificate, whatever it is they want to do. But we have opportunities to disrupt the harms that the educational harms that they've experienced, especially students who come from under-resourced schools. And so that starts with this kind of philosophical kind of repositionality where we see community colleges as spaces where we can undo harm. We don't do that currently, right? So and there's no middle ground, there's no liminal space. If you're not undoing harm, then you are either tacitly or knowingly perpetuating the harm. And so that's one of the main points in that book, Minding the Obligation Gap. How can we radically reimagine community colleges so that, especially for students that come from low resource schools, how can we then create an educational experience that's so robust for them, because we don't have the same strictures that four-year colleges do? How can we create an experience that's so robust that they can not only find their footing and be prepared to go to the next level, right, but can be young people, or not just young people, because anybody can go to community college, can be students who are fully able to be critical with their thought and question how they can positively contribute to a more just society. We have opportunities to do that in every discipline, but the problem is you speak to certain people, well, that's soft stuff. That has no place in STEM. No, yeah, it does. I wrote a whole book on it and a dissertation. I've written, at this point, almost 500 pages, right? Published, peer-reviewed pages on how important it is to use STEM as a lever for social justice, right? And we understand that we can do these things in the humanities as well. I mean, community colleges, we have an opportunity. That's why I'm so drawn to. I mean, it took me ultimately 8 years to get to community college, but I'm so drawn to community colleges because of the potential that they have. But it's going to take a mindset. It's going to take a paradigm shift, though.
It's going to take a lot of work. Let me ask, let's continue, because I'm looking at the time and I want to be respectful. Who influenced you to become an academic CEO, a business owner, an academic owner of a school? Who influenced you and your wife?
So my wife has always been, her father is a serial entrepreneur, right? And so he is, but because of that, she loves her father, but she saw his struggles and she's like, I don't want any part of that, right? And I'm not particularly industrious either, but she's more industrious than me. But here's the thing, I have 6 boys. And so I knew that my boys were not going to make it not going to make it, they'd be fine. I didn't want them in a public school where we were before, because there were some issues there. And then here, right, I don't want to put them in a new situation where they're so, there's not a lot of other Black students here, right? And so And so it became really important to me to figure out. And so we were trying to do homeschooling. Yeah, I'm a pretty good teacher, man. It's really hard to homeschool your own kids, especially at home. You know what I'm saying? I get fed up. I'm just going to go to my room, right? And nobody's learning anything. And so, you know, I love them more than, I mean, you know, I'd drown a shark for each one of them, and I could barely swim. But homeschooling was hard, right? And so we were looking for some alternatives. The way that the story goes is that my oldest son went to Acton Academy. Is 4 years old, so we didn't found it; we purchased it. And so the person who founded it, they had the opportunity to do. Her husband had the opportunity to do some work in Puerto Rico, so they were moving to Puerto Rico, not educational work, a different industry, and so they were going to close down the school. But my son, my oldest son, who's brilliant, all my sons are brilliant. My oldest son, obviously I'm biased, super shy. Like almost like, it was social anxiety, but it was almost like a social anxiety paralysis. Like he couldn't even function in some places. He's a beautiful kid and super smart. And once he got warmed up, he was fine. But it was the idea of meeting new people that put him in a just kind of perilous predicament. So much so that when we went to go to the orientation for this school, we were like 1 minute late, because he was hemming and hawing. He did trying anything not to go, and he wouldn't go in. It took about 30 minutes for me to coax him in there through prayer. I mean, I'm laying on hands, crying, everything else, and he finally went in there. Once he went in, he was fine. After about 3 months at this school, at Acton Academy, Reading, he was a different kid. He has friends. He is much more gregarious, right? And, you know, he's my son. I love him dearly. Had he never changed, it would have still been fine for me. But for him, his confidence has skyrocketed. And so I could see the value in this model based on firsthand experience. And so we, you know, it's not like, because we do consulting too, right? So we still work with community colleges, you know, year round, helping them institutionalize and systematize race, equity, inclusion, and justice work. That's what I was doing almost exclusively after I left College of San Mateo as the, you know, inaugural director of equity there. But, you know, I got all this consulting stuff going on, you know, which I'm blessed to be able to do. And we got 6 boys. You know, I got 2 houses. I got a dog. I got stuff to get. I mean, why not tack on 50 more kids, right? And so that's where we are. But I just felt like, as long as it wasn't, you know, this is as far as my kind of business acumen went. As long as it wasn't losing money, then it was worth it to me to invest in it. Because even if I was going to pay for private school for 6 kids, I'd be paying all the money anyway. But you know, I'm being cheeky right now, but I really felt like it was an opportunity for me to spend more time with my kids. And I just, you know, and it sounds crazy because people trust me with their children, but I'm just not that trusting. I don't feel like I can put my, let me take a step back. Right. So when your kids go to public school, I'm not knocking public school, I'm a beneficiary of public school. I think that public school can be really, really good. When you hand your students over to a school, right, you have to sign a form saying that the people there are functioning as a parent in your absence, right? There's a Latin term in loco parentis, right? And so I saw that when my oldest son went to school, right? The work that he was doing was too easy for him. This is a young man who was reading at 15 months old. He was speaking at 6 months old. He talked to you about quantum physics at 7 months old. Like he's a prodigy, right? He doesn't want to be, but he is. And so, and nobody's going to force him to be. But anyway, so the work that he was doing was far too easy for him. And he'd get really, really frustrated because he'd have to stop doing something really, really fun to do homework, right? And I'm not somebody who cares about homework anyway. As an educator, I feel like, you know, it can be monotonous and it can be drill work and it's not necessarily beneficial. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to go talk to your teacher. And so I designed some homework that was more challenging, and I just wanted to share it with the school. And I said, listen, you can share it with any student who's in the same kind of position as Judah. And the principal was amenable to that. The teacher felt some type of way about it, you know, because she felt like I was trying to encroach, and I wasn't. I was just trying to make sure that you know, because I know that they have a lot going on. I just want to make sure that there was other things that students can do. And so he didn't want to do the homework, even though I had got clearance from the principal. He wanted to do the homework that was assigned, even though he hated it. And I said, look, buddy, I'm telling you, I spoke to the principal. Here's the letter, right? He's a really linear thinker, right? He just has to see all these things. Here's the letter that was signed by the principal. You can do this work. He said, if I don't do this work that my teacher assigned, I'm going to get in trouble. And I'm like, buddy, I'm telling you, you're not going to get in trouble. I'm the trouble. Nobody else is the trouble, right? If I'm telling you you're not in trouble, you're not in trouble. There's no one else that can get you in trouble. And he was so kind of upset, even despondent, because he felt like he was going to get in trouble. And so I realized at that point, that's too much control over my child. I'm the trouble because I'm daddy. If daddy says you're not in trouble, then you're not in trouble, right? And so he couldn't, and I mean, he's just 7 years old, right? But he could not reconcile that my word trumped the teacher's word, right? And it's not like I'm a control freak, but I was trying to put him at ease about something, and he couldn't be put at ease because he was more worried about what the teacher said vis-a-vis what I was saying. And so for me, that was too much. That was too much control. It didn't. I understand control in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, that needed to stop. And so I just wasn't comfortable with that. So for that reason, I wanted to. And he had been asking to be homeschooled anyway, so I wanted to allow him to explore other ways of completing his educational journey. And so that had as much to do with any of the other things. Once I saw that in him, right, because we have no scholastic concerns for him at all. He can do anything scholastically. But just humanly, in his little spirit, because I believe that we're spiritual beings in human bodies, his little spirit was being oppressed unknowingly by the teacher and unintentionally by the teacher, but it was still being oppressed. And I want him to be able to be free. And so that was one of the drivers for what ultimately led to this move.
Well, I wish nothing but great success for you and your wife's endeavor, the Acton Academy. I got about 4 more questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
Tell me some of the challenges that you faced as a man of color in the academic academy in general.
Okay.
So as the director of equity, at College of San Mateo, you did, I think you did some work as a lecturer. Did you do some work as a lecturer at Berkeley?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so what are some of the challenges that you faced as a man of color?
It's interesting, right? So, maybe this happens to everybody. I don't think it does. But I remember when I was initially a lecturer at Berkeley, first I was a GSI and I became a lecturer in rhetoric and also in education. And students would ask me, earnestly, they would like, hey, how serious are you about homework? Those are not the type of questions that you ask at UC Berkeley, right? And I feel like those questions were racially coded, right? If you're a student at UC Berkeley, right, one of the top schools in the country, you understand that you have homework, right? And so I felt like if I looked different, that I don't believe that question would have come out, right? But fast forwarding to my work, first at Peralta, then later at SMCCD as an equity officer, something that I ran up against was this continued insistence that everything that I was saying was too academic. And it speaks to what you were saying, right? Some folks in community colleges, and this is true of 4-year colleges too, don't want to challenge themselves. But to me, it was problematic because I don't have access to any books that anybody else, doesn't have access to, right? And so the things that I was saying, were things that were data driven, right? That were based on literature, right? Of course, I'm on independent thought, but these were things that were not necessarily, there's this term, it means to create a new term, right? Neologisms. These were not neologisms. I wasn't making things up, but people would often push back and say, Jeremiah, I don't get what you're saying about equity because it's too academic. I said, but we work in a space. This is a college. How can it be too academic? And so my response to that, right, and not begrudgingly, but I have to be honest because I answer to God, not to man, was that, listen, you make time for what's important to you. And oh man, that did not go over well. People were highly upset about that, but I stand by that. The reason why I can have the conversations that I can have about the things, because I can't talk about everything, right? The conversations I can have at a high level is because I care about those things, and I've done the work necessary to put myself in a position to be able to have high level conversations about those things, conversations that are hopefully, pushing against anachronistic paradigms, right? So that we can have shifts that actually lead to something good. And so when I said that, people were upset. And I was not incredibly surprised, nor was I particularly worried about it, because I felt like it was a wake-up call, and it was also an invitation for people to kind of enter into the space. So the thing that was, and then, we all see this, people of color, especially women of color, right, is that I would say something, and there would be no response, or there would be negative feedback. And in other meetings, somebody would say the same exact thing. Right. And this is somebody that looked very different from me. and it was celebrated. It was just like,
that's right.
You get to see that so much. Like maybe the first couple of times it's an accident, they didn't hear me, right? But there were all those things. But a lot of it,
if you bring that to the person's attention, everybody get all worked up and get upset.
Yeah. I don't get upset because I grew up dodging bullets, Professor Henderson. So it's not like those types of things didn't weigh on me the same way. To me, it was always the job was the job and the work is the work. And I was trying to figure out how to make those two things jive. But where it didn't, right? Once I left work, I didn't think about it anymore. I think about the work. I didn't think about the job, right? I'm at home with my family. That's where I am. So there were a lot of instances where my so we play this game, right? And the game is called a cultural introduction. And so when I do workshops, around race, equity, inclusion, and justice, we do a cultural introduction. A cultural introduction, you can only introduce yourself in a cultural manner, right? Whatever that means to you, right? It's the expansive idea of culture. But you can't talk about your academic achievement, nor can you speak to your position, right? Because, that's part of who you are, but that's not the entirety of who you are. But in workspaces, we act as though it's the entirety of who we are. And so so I would say, I'm the oldest son. I'm a father of 6. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, right? I identify as Black, even though I'm also Choctaw, Portuguese, and Irish, right? So there are ways that you introduce yourself. And the idea of the game is to humanize people. But there are 2 groups that provide the most feedback on that game, right? And so the first group is men who have been racialized as white, primarily cisgendered, straight white men, right? And so they'll say, well, I didn't like this game so much because, and so part of it is, if it's your turn, Professor Henderson, then I just have to listen. I can't ask any question. Doesn't matter if what you say resonated with me at my core. You get to speak uninterrupted for 2 minutes, then it's my turn, then it's the next person's turn, then the exercise is over, right? And so what happens is that they'll say, well, I felt like my voice was being diminished because I wasn't able to ask questions, right? And so when you've been led to believe that your voice has primacy over everything else, right, then it becomes problematic when you can't just interrupt. But for Black women who speak up quite a bit about it, and there's kind of connective tissue between their comments, it's for a very different reason. Black women say that if I'm not able to lead with my qualifications, I don't believe that anybody's actually going to listen to what I say, right? So it's very different. So there's spaces where what I'm saying makes sense, but it doesn't make sense until I tell them I got a Ph.D. from UC Berkeley, right? So I have to qualify what I'm saying more than other folks, and that's part and parcel of being Black in academic spaces, right? You have to qualify. There has to be an additional level of qualification. Even though I'm citing all the sources and everything else, there has to be an additional level of qualification. And then there's always this kind of, in my experience, right? This is anecdotal, but in my experience, there's always this skepticism when I share, and I know that you've experienced this too, or when we share our kind of reaction to something. Well, what is it based on? Other people can just say I was hurt by this, but I have to tell you exactly what I was hurt by and relive the scenario before people can understand that I'm a human being, right? We know that, in 2018, there was a report from Johns Hopkins medical students. 52% of them still felt like Black people are just innately more resistant to pain, right? And so we know that they're talking about physical pain there, but people think about this also, right, with emotional pain, right, or psychological pain. So for me to say someone offended me, I can't just say someone offended me and people come to my aid. I have to be able to tell people exactly what happened and why it was offensive in the first place. And I've seen that not be the case for non-Black folks. And so those are kind of 2 things: excessive qualification, right? And this is also a level of qualification. I just can't have a reaction or a feeling. I have to explain to you, right, why I'm having that feeling. And I feel like I'm asked to explain so long in enough detail where people can try to pick it apart. I'll give you a prime example. I used to live in San Francisco. When we first got married, I loved my wife dearly. But I was like a little bit sad when we first got married because we lived on 19th and Lincoln. And so if y'all know that area of San Francisco, it gets dark at like 3 o'clock, right? Because the fog rolls in. We were right across the street from Golden Gate Park, right? The fog rolls in and it's like, it's dark at 3 o'clock and that's not fun. It wasn't fun for me. But also I realized that, in the rhetoric program, when I graduated, there was only 2 Black males on the stage, right? When I graduated with my master's degree, it was just me, Ph.D. was just me. And so anyhow, I was talking about this burden of representation that I felt, right? Because people didn't know my name in the rhetoric department until an issue of race came up, and then they would ask me to speak for all people of color everywhere, which I would, be very, very clear that I can't do that, right? And so I was talking about just being tired. Like I was physically psychosomatic, right? I'm dealing with these things emotionally, cognitively, and then I was physically tired as a result because I'm carrying this burden of representation. And I was explaining this to a group while in graduate school, in my doctoral program, and this one young lady said, but nobody actually said you have to do that. I was like, no one explicitly said that. She said, oh, so it's kind of like you made it up, right? And so that was like those experiences in a nutshell. Right? Like if you can't drill down on every single detail, it's kind of like, it's not really real. And so anyway, that was, those kind of experiences are dehumanizing, right? And yeah.
Well, you know what, Dr. Sims, I'm going to ask you just one more question because I'm looking at our clock and I'm very, very timely and I don't want to take too much more of your time. Please share any thoughts and ideas you would like to communicate about just your philosophy about education or just the advertisement of your wonderful K through 12 school, the Acton Academy.
All right, awesome. So what I'm interested in at Acton Academy is the same thing, the same type of work that we do at Rooted in Love with the consultancy. And so you mentioned a garden, and I think that is a perfect kind of metaphor to think about the way that we try to impact, the organizations or the entities or the institutions that we partner with. And the same thing we do at this school. So, I'm trying to eat better. I'm 48. I got a 3-month-old, right? So I need to stay alive for a little while. And so I'm trying to figure out what makes food healthy because you get these kind of different ideas of what healthy food is, right? Sometimes it's the Mediterranean diet, there's other diets, right? I was a pescatarian, I was a vegan, all these different things. And so what actually determines the health of the food we eat is the soil that it comes from, right? If the soil is healthy, irrespective of what the food looks like, it doesn't have to look like, right, this kind of archetypical apple, right? It can even be misshapen, but if the soil is healthy, the nutrients that you receive from it is healthy. So I start really looking into soil. And there are 4 primary ways, there's several ways, but there's 4 ways that I key in on in maintaining healthy soil, right? So first is to avoid soil disturbance, right? So when you are creating safe space for radical inclusivity to be birthed, right? You have to avoid soil disturbance. You don't let people just come in with any kind of thing and interrupt the processes that are going on. Then you need to provide soil cover, right? So sometimes there's too much light, there's too much scrutiny with regard to the work that's going on, and you can't necessarily quantify it, but you know that good things are going on there, right? So you need to figure out how to safeguard those spaces, right? The third way that you maintain healthy soil is to maximize the presence of living roots, right? And so we know that there are people who have been doing grassroots equity work for a long time. They're not necessarily recognized for it, nor are they compensated for it. So we have to make sure that we are allies to those people, right? Because they're already, you see this like in Emoji programs, Puente programs, people who maybe they're only positively impacting because of budgetary considerations, 35 students, but there are things that we can take from that, borrow from that, partner with that, so that we can positively impact more students. And then the fourth one, and this is really, really interesting, the way that you maintain healthy soil so that every seed that is planted reaches its fullest potential is to maintain biodiversity. Now, why do you need to maintain biodiversity? Maintaining biodiversity or diversity precludes diseases from taking hold, right? And so when we talk about diseases, we talk about cis heteropatriarchy, anti-blackness, white supremacy, right? Trans antagonism, all these different things. They cannot take hold in the same way when there are diverse voices right, that can speak to the issues, right? These diseases don't get to take hold. It's when things become insular and they become kind of homogenous, right? That's where you see these diseases taking hold. And so everything that we do is trying to create these kind of beloved community gardens. We think that community colleges can function as beloved community gardens, and that's the same thing we're trying to do here at Acton Academy. And so we borrow liberally from the work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, where he talked about what it means to develop a beloved community. For him, these beloved communities in the aggregate function as a world house where anyone can come in, be whoever they are, and have their radical dignity recognized, affirmed, championed, right? So that's the word. That's the work. We are invested in seeing that in our own family with our 6 boys, and our school, and with everybody that we work with in this kind of race, equity, inclusion, and justice space. We are figuring out how to help people cultivate healthy, sustainable, beloved community gardens. So that's the work for me.
Well, as you have talked about some of our racialized diseases that I've never really heard it put quite so eloquently, I want to thank you as the CEO of Professor for Life Incorporated for taking the time to come and share your philosophies and your ideas. As a senior man, I would say, you say 48, but wait till you get 63.
Yeah, I'll be there.
I look at you and I say, man, I would love to be 48 again. But you know what? I wish you and your lovely wife and your children nothing but much success. I wish you nothing but God's promise in all that you endeavor to do. You are a delightful professional. I'm glad that we met some time ago, and I look forward to driving up to see your actual school.
Anytime. I got a hope.
I want to do that. I'm going to drive up. I'm going to get a good friend of mine who lives in Sassoon, and get him to drive with me, and I'm going to come up there now that I'm
got space. Y'all can stay. I told you I got a lot of rooms.
I'm going to come up there, and maybe I'll spend the night, and I'll take all y'all out to dinner.
Let's do it. Look, I want to show you this picture before we get out of here. I told you.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. Dr. Mendoza.
Yeah, Jennifer Taylor Mendoza.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you once again for taking the time.
Of course, my pleasure.
You have a positive evening, and God bless you, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Oh, yeah, let's talk soon. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.